Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. Yeah, I wanted to review a book that I read. I just finished called Fair Donald Trump in the White House by Bob Woodward. I made a video a couple months ago when the book first came out, talking about how Woodward and Trump knew about the coronavirus, and they both kind of covered it up. But this book goes into a lot of detail about the time of Donald Trump in the White House and what Woodward thought about it. A little background on Bob Woodward. He is one of the journalists who, in the 1970s, exposed Richard Nixon in the Watergate scandal that eventually led to Richard Nixon's resignation. So, and since that time, subsequently, he's written several books on all the presidents that came after Richard Nixon, on Bill Clinton, on Barack Obama, on George W. Bush, and now on Donald Trump. And I'm sure he will write one eventually about Joe Biden. But as the Trump era comes to a close, this book is kind of a look back on the tumultuous years of the 45th president. Yeah, what did I think of it? I thought it was a really, a really insightful look into the psychology of Donald Trump and how of his approach to politics and his approach to governance, which was very different and very unique. It was not like any other president before him, given mostly because Trump was not a professional politician. He came from the business world, he came from the entertainment world, the business world, most most of all. And because of his lack of political sophistication, the book really shows how he was undermined in his administration by other people in his administration, particularly Steve Bannon and his son-in-law Jared Kushner. And it was kind of like different factions in the Trump administration would lead him into different directions. Like Jared Kushner would say one thing, and then Bannon's faction would say something else, and then the General J.R.R. McMaster, who the book reveals that Trump didn't get along with this person, and him and Bannon both would relentlessly mock this general, like, you know, little fourth graders in school, really engaging a lot of immature behavior on the president's part. But what do you expect from Donald Trump, and Steve Bannon? But there's a lot of internal factionalism within the administration because, again, people viewed the voters and the people in the administration kind of viewed Trump as like a clean slate that they could fulfill their desires and their wants onto. They could project their desires and their wants onto him. Both his son-in-law Bannon and the GOP establishment, particularly in foreign policy, where he really had no clue as to what he was doing. He was in this book reveals it, he was the type of president that he would just get his cues from watching, certain news programs. He really didn't research much of anything, and he just went entirely on gut instinct. And when it came to the coronavirus in this book, it really shows how Trump mismanaged the coronavirus and tried to downplay it for political purposes. Because two things could be said, in my opinion, about um, Donald Trump. He was a very masterful campaigner, but once he got in, again, he didn't know really what to do. So he viewed this corona thing as something that could be his undoing. So he tried to minimize the importance of it, excuse me, by um, convincing his followers and his supporters that it wasn't as bad as it actually really was, by going out, still doing rallies, and trying to just, say, oh, it's not that bad, it's not that bad, which he does throughout the book. And he talks, continuously tries to downgrade his predecessor, Barack Obama. And there's one part in the book where he talks about how he's like, oh, Obama, all he did all day was watch basketball. And then Woodward proceeds to say how all Trump did all day was just watch the news, particularly Fox News. And you were worried about ratings, you were worried about how he drew, what kind of crowds he drew at his rallies, stuff that really wasn't important and really superficial stuff. The book, if you read this book in conjunction with Woodward's 2010 book on Barack Obama called Obama's Wars, you kind of get a sense how they were different in their approach. Barack Obama was very cool, very calculated, very laid back, and kind of over intellectualized a lot of stuff, whereas Trump over emotionalized a lot of stuff. He went on his gut instinct, he went on his emotional intellect as opposed to his actual intellect, logical intellect. He didn't really think about it. He just freestyled it. He just winged it. But the title of the book, Fear, comes from the fact of how Trump approached the job of the president. He was not very diplomatic. He was not, he approached it the same way he approached the real estate business. You know, the Trump Enterprises was in the private sector. You can just order people around. You can tell them what to do, and you can run it sort of like a dictator. This is how he ran Trump Industries, like a dictator, always barking orders, always telling people what to do and what not to do. But in politics, you can't do that. You have to be diplomatic. It's a give and take situation, and you have to handle situations as they come. Crisis, like um, wars or viruses or pandemics or other stuff. You, hey, 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 Lise, you can't just you know wing it off of your gut. You have to you know be very decisive and very careful with decisions that you make. You know, and in a way, you can over intellectualize certain stuff, like Woodward accuses. Barack Obama of doing, but you can also under intellectualize things like he accuses Trump of doing. And when you're a political novice and you don't really know what to expect of it, and you don't do your research, and you go in there unprepared like a deer caught in the headlights, you will get pulled in every which way direction, and you will get overwhelmed. In other words, when you try to drain the swamp could overtake you, and you could yourself become a swamp monster. And to the point where you'll be so paranoid you won't know who to trust. And that was the gist I got from the book, was that Trump, he really didn't know who to trust when it came to advice. He always felt that people in his own administration were trying to undermine him and trying to you know do this decision making for him. And he thought he could run it like Trump Industries, like it was New York, but it's not New York, it's Washington. And New York is very different than Washington. Politics in the public sector is very different than, you know, private sector entrepreneurship. And it's different because when you don't succeed in your businesses and you're a businessman or a businesswoman and you don't succeed, your losses are your losses only. But in the public sector, in politics, when you don't succeed and you fail, like was the case with the coronavirus, your losses are everybody's losses. You know, it's not only your life at stake, it's the life and the livelihood of other men and women in the country, the entire country, and in the case of the United States, the entire world. So Trump never really grasped that. He just thought, oh, well, we'll absorb the losses, we'll take whatever losses we get, and that'll be it. We'll just keep it moving. But that's not how a responsible person governs. That's very sound for business in a business entrepreneurial setting, but it actually works against you in in politics. You know, because a lot of other people's lives at stake, not just your life and your livelihood. And the book actually reveals how Trump is not the successful businessman that he purported to be. His son-in-law actually says that he's not. He's cash broke. Actually, it reminded me in a way of reading um, Michael Jackson's book, the books that I know about Michael Jackson, who like Trump, was a friend of Trump, and where they were closely associated with one another in the 80s. And they were kind of similar in a sense that you always thought, as a viewer, as an observer, and a member of the public, you always thought Trump was richer than what he actually was, and his organization was not run smoothly, and he spent irresponsibly. He made business decisions very irresponsibly, and Michael Jackson similarly spent irresponsibly, made decisions financially very irresponsibly, and was not as rich as the general public perceived him to be. Uh, he was, yeah, he predicted that Trump would not win a second term because of the things I said. At least, the um, the the irresponsibility of Trump, because a lot of those celebrities from the '80s, especially in Trump's inner circle, like I said, like Vince McMahon, Michael Jackson, Oprah, and people like that, you know, to us they appear very rich, very entrepreneurial. But at the same time, those people have suffered tremendous financial losses, just as many financial gains as they've suffered. They've suffered losses too, and they can afford to do that because they're really successful, rich people. But none of them, none of those other people, were the president of the United States. So rightfully so, Woodward predicts that Trump will be a one-term president, and that's what happened. It's interesting because Trump himself trusted Woodward because of Woodward's reputation from the Watergate stuff. But unlike Richard Nixon, Trump was not politically sophisticated. And one thing that is very telling, that is a quote from the book that Trump says, is that he said in the 80s, in the 90s, or particularly the 80s, he said, the media, they used to love me, and now they hate me. And it's true. You go back and you watch those old, you know, 1980s, type shows like Oprah and the tabloid shows. They all used to love and be enamored with the wealth of Donald Trump. It was all a facade because he was never as wealthy as he claimed to be or purported to be. It was all a character, a fake facade, you know. It was all phoniness. And uh, his election to the office of the presidency revealed how badly he is as a manager. Yeah, and that it really was all a facade. It was all fake, but unfortunately for us, the consequences of Trump's ineptitude was very real. And a lot of people knew that, you know, Trump in 2016, they knew that he was kind of bullshitting. But they voted for him anyway because, well, some didn't like Hillary and some just, some of the racist and out there people that hated Barack Obama just voted for him because they were racist and out there. And he became a symbol for their rage and their hatred for the political system. You know, but it wasn't going to work a second time around. You know, the image had already been shattered. To me, one of the things that Woodward said that was very interesting was that Trump does represent the culture of the 80s because the 80s was all about these rich multimedia celebrities like Trump, like Oprah, you know, spending in excess. You know, the rich get richer. That was, you know, a sign of the times in the 80s. You know, taking advantage of people and you know, trying to starve them out, and that's why they loved him. But as soon as he got into office, they hated him because they realized that he really didn't know what to do. You know, and he cost his mismanagement cost a lot of people their lives and their livelihoods. And he just, till to this day, you know, continues to deny reality and deny the results of the election, you know. But yeah, Woodward did predict that, at least. Predicted that Biden would win. That's how Biden is such a contrast to Trump because uh, Trump, a guy with no experience and a very proud individual that isn't humble in the least, is defeated by Joe Biden, who is a very humble individual and very politically experienced, one of the most politically experienced people that we've ever elected to office in this country. So overall, Woodward was right that in exposing Trump, and not just exposing Trump, but exposing the person that I believe was really the president for 4 years, and that was Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner was the man pulling the strings of Trump. Most of the policies that we saw from Trump that Woodward discusses in the book, such as foreign policies like in the Middle East or the treaties with Korea, with North Korea, Kim Jong Un, is stuff that Jared Kushner came up with. And Jared Kushner also says in the book that you can lie to the people and they wouldn't know the difference. You can obfuscate the truth, and that's what we saw throughout this whole presidency. He was the guy. Him and Ivanka were the ones really pulling the strings behind Trump and his foreign policy stuff, and even his economic stuff. In many ways, Kushner was the real president. You know, the one making the decisions. Trump was like, he was effectively like the Queen of England. You know what I mean? Like, you know, the Queen of England is the queen, but she's not really making the decisions. Other people are making them, you know, or administrators and stuff. And that's kind of how Trump's presidency kind of was. And Woodward reveals that it was other people, Jared Kushner and Ivanka on one side and Steve Bannon on another side, that were kind of making the decisions. And in the end, Steve Bannon was let go and fired. And of course, Ivanka, Javanka, as they call it in the book, was the ones making, that were kept on and were made the decision. So all the good stuff that happened in the Trump administration, like in the Middle East, all the peace treaties that all the Arab countries made with, you know, Israel and the United States, were decided by Kushner, and all the bad stuff, like choosing to ignore the coronavirus and choosing to um, engage in that deal with North Korea, that was all Jerry Kushner and his daughter as well. You know what I mean? So Trump was just like an empty cup, that anybody could fill their ideas into his head, from any sort of side. Because he didn't know the difference between what is a good idea and what is a bad idea, because he never studied the background. He never studied the background on any of this stuff. Where, in contrast to his predecessor, Barack Obama, who studied it all, down to the minute details. Trump didn't study any of it. So he was just listening to what other people said, particularly his daughter and his son in law. Even the platinum plan and the stuff with the outreach to the black community and to the Latino community was all Kushner. The later stuff was mostly Kushner. The early stuff was more Bannon, the campaign stuff. The stuff about building a wall, that was all Roger Stone, Jared Kushner, other people that advising him. Trump was just the figurehead. He was just parroting stuff that other people said. And so was Melania, his wife. She was also um, parroting a lot of. She was directly parroting stuff that Michelle Obama said, as we saw. He was directly copying stuff from Michelle Obama, but she was copying stuff from other people too. You know, another person that didn't really have an original idea. The book, Woodward's book, actually reveals that Melania and Donald, they slept in separate beds. And the inner tension between um, Melania and Ivanka, who didn't like each other. Who didn't like each other. It was just complete, civil war within the White House, because Ivanka and Melania didn't like each other. Bannon and Jared Kushner didn't like each other. Trump's generals didn't like him either. John Bolton, who wanted to push him into war with Iran, didn't like him either. Because they wanted to, they figured, oh, we couldn't get what we wanted done under Obama because he wouldn't go to war, for those 8 years, but we got a Republican back in, we'll go to war now. You know, we'll try to push Trump into another war in the Middle East. But he didn't do it because he approached it from a business type standpoint, not from a moral, not for moral reasons, like Obama, but he felt that you know, then it'll be bad financially for the United States. So that's why he didn't do it. And plus, because of COVID, he was about to do it with Iran in the early part of 2020, which Woodward reveals in the book, but he couldn't. But he kind of resisted going to war, because especially when Steve Bannon was there, because um, whenever they would try to push him into a war, Bannon would always remind him, you campaigned against war, you campaigned against war. Remember what you said. Remember what you said. And then Trump would decide against it. But then somebody else would tell him something else. He would get different intelligence, and he would switch again. But he never did it because, you know, he was very indecisive. And he cared more for what, his daughter and his son in law would say than the people, who were the generals and stuff. And that really made them mad because they felt like we finally got another Republican in office. We'll get another George W. Bush type, and we're getting another war. But didn't happen. And plus, Trump's jealousy of Barack Obama. He wanted to win a Nobel Peace Prize too. you know, so he figured, keeping us out of any new wars would do that for him, but it didn't. It didn't. That was it. I think Woodward did a really good job with this. It kind of showed um, why we shouldn't be electing celebrities or political novices to public office, because it could cost us all very um, severely. Peace, guys.